Hello and welcome to BYJU'S IAS. Let's get started with the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper, which is dominated by the election-related news as expected. But even then, there are few important articles relevant for your exam. Let us look at all these newspaper articles one by one, beginning with Shakti Kanta Das appointed RBI Governor. But what is it that you need to understand from this newspaper article? Number one, his appointment has been cleared by the Appointments Committee of the Cabinet. The head of this committee is the Prime Minister himself. And who is the other member of this committee? Minister of Home Affairs. Can be a very important statement for your prelims. Second, what is the role, what is the task, what is the function of this Appointments Committee of the Cabinet? All the appointments that are made at the level of Joint Secretary or above, they are to be cleared by the Appointments Committee of the Cabinet. Similarly, RBI Governor, important appointments to various public sector undertakings, they are all to be cleared by Appointments Committee of the Cabinet. That is the role of this Appointments Committee of the Cabinet. But how many cabinet committees do we have as of now? There are 6. Number 1, we have Cabinet Committee on Security, Cabinet Committee on Political Affairs, Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs, Cabinet Committee on Parliamentary Affairs, we have Cabinet Committee on Accommodation, and 6th is the Cabinet Committee on Appointments or Appointments Committee of the Cabinet. This can be another important statement for your prelims exam. Out of these, Cabinet Committee on Political Affairs is considered to be the most powerful cabinet committee, and that is why sometimes it is referred to as super cabinet. So the question can be, which of the following cabinet committee is referred to as super cabinet, and that is Cabinet Committee on Political Affairs. Another important thing, this term cabinet committee does not find mention anywhere in the Constitution. In fact, the word cabinet was not mentioned in the Constitution, in the original Constitution. This word was added to the Constitution on account of 44th Constitutional Amendment Act in 1978. That means till 1978 the word cabinet was not there in the Constitution. So we were following the British Convention, where cabinet is all the important ministers of the government. But this cabinet word got introduced into the Constitution in 1978. But Cabinet Committee is not mentioned in the Constitution. These are all extra constitutional entities. That is another important statement relevant for your prelims examination. Let's look at another news on page number 3 relevant for your prelims. It talks about Sparrows. Now if we look at IUCN status of House Sparrow, it says the status is least concern. But even then, the numbers of house sparrows are dwindling, declining day by day. What are the possible reasons for that? This can also be a potential question for your prelims examination. Which of the following are the reasons for the declining number of house sparrows in India? Number 1 reason is the architecture. Architecture of our homes, architecture of our buildings, of our office buildings. Because previously our homes were designed, our office spaces were designed in such a manner that there were cavities. And these cavities provided spaces for sparrows for the construction of nests. Now we have seen increasingly our office space is made up of glass. The exterior of our buildings is made up of glass, and as much as possible these cavities have been removed altogether. So the habitat loss has taken place for house sparrows. That is why we see their numbers are declining. Second, mobile towers. The microwaves emitted because of these mobile towers, this is another reason why we see declining numbers of house sparrows. Third, if you look at in the past, our mothers, sisters, family members would clean the grain in the open, and there will be some leftover, and this leftover would provide food for these house sparrows. Now, we don't clean our grains normally in the open, and that too mostly in the urban areas, in our cities. And that is why in our cities we see the sparrows, they are declining in their numbers. Also, intolerance. We are becoming increasingly intolerant to the species. And that is why we see that despite the fact that sparrows are harmless creatures, we do not welcome, we do not tolerate these species. We don't want these species to make nests close to our homes or near the balconies of our homes. This is another reason why we see declining numbers of house sparrows, particularly in the urban areas. That is what you need to understand from this newspaper article, because now artificial nests are created, are given to villagers in many blocks in Odisha. That is what this newspaper article is all about. Let's look at another important news. HS urges Punjab Speaker to accept his resignation. Now this is where you need to understand how to read a newspaper. There may be a political news, but you have to have an eye to extract polity news from the political news. So what is the polity news out of this political news? If an MLA has to resign or an MP has to resign, they resign by submitting their resignation to the Speaker, whether Speaker of Legislative Assembly or Lok Sabha. But is it binding on the Speaker to accept this resignation? No. That means when I, as a member of the parliament or member of the legislature, when I want to resign, I submit my resignation to the Speaker. But it is not mandatory, it is not binding on the Speaker to accept my resignation. The Speaker has to be assured that my resignation was voluntary, that my resignation was not forced. I was not coerced or blackmailed into resigning from my office. If the Speaker is satisfied that this resignation is voluntary, without any threat, without any coercion, without any blackmail, only then can the Speaker accept the resignation of the member of the parliament or a member of the legislative assembly. That is one thing that you need to understand from this newspaper article. But one more thing. We have President of India, we have the Vice President of India. They resign by submitting their resignation to each other. That means President can resign by submitting his resignation to the Vice President. Vice President can resign by submitting his resignation to the President. But in this case, it is binding. That means if the President submits his resignation to the Vice President, it is binding on the Vice President to accept this resignation. If the Vice President resigns by submitting his resignation to the President, it is binding on the President to accept this resignation. But in case of an MLA or an MP, it is not binding unless and until the Speaker is satisfied that this resignation is voluntary, it is not coerced. That is what you need to understand from this newspaper article. Let's look at another news on page number 9 of the Delhi edition of the Hindu. There are close to 21 national parks and wildlife sanctuaries in India where a 10-kilometer eco-sensitive area has not been designated. That means if this is a national park, 10-kilometer area around this national park should be declared eco-sensitive so that no construction activity can go on, and ultimately we are trying to safeguard, protect this national park or this wildlife sanctuary. Amicus curiae, and who is this amicus curiae? Friend of the court. And who is the friend of the court? Normally a senior lawyer of the Supreme Court or a High Court. And this amicus curiae assists the Supreme Court benches or the judges in disposing of a particular matter. Let's say, for example, there is an application filed in the Supreme Court. Supreme Court judges would ask a senior lawyer or a senior advocate, please assist us in disposing of this case. And in this case, you will become our amicus curiae, the friend of the court. This friend of the court, this amicus curiae, submitted before the Supreme Court that there are 21 national parks and wildlife sanctuaries in this country where a 10-kilometer eco-sensitive area has not been designated. And now what Supreme Court has directed? Supreme Court has directed the center to declare this 10-kilometer area around the national parks as eco-sensitive area. That is what this newspaper article is all about. Now let us look at a newspaper article on page number 9. Don't reveal identity of rape victims, says the Supreme Court. But if you're reading this newspaper article, you will also be wondering that there exists Indian Penal Code which prohibits to reveal the identity of the rape victims. So if there is an Indian Penal Code section already in place, so what is new in the Supreme Court ruling? There is something new. And what is that? Previously, we thought that when we talk about the identity of the rape victim, we are only talking about the name of this rape victim. That means the name should not be disclosed. That is why in 2012, December 16, when Nirbhaya was gang raped in a moving bus in Delhi, Nirbhaya was not her original name. But this name, Nirbhaya, Fearless, was given to her because you could not have revealed the identity, the name of this rape victim. Because if we reveal the name of the rape victim, it's going to victimize her. It may lead to harassment of the rape victim, so on and so forth. But now the Supreme Court has said you cannot publish any material which may lead to the identity of the victims. That means forget about name. You cannot disclose anything if it even remotely reveals the identity of the rape victim. For example, the village she comes from, or the caste she belongs to, or any other information or material that can lead to a possible revelation of her identity. That is something that cannot be done. The Supreme Court has banned it. That means Supreme Court has prohibited the media, social media, print media, electronic media from publishing any material that may even remotely reveal the identity of the victims of the sexual crimes. That is what this newspaper article is all about. Also, Supreme Court has given a go-ahead, a green signal to the government that you partner and deal with the social networking sites to curb the spread of child pornography, to curb the spread of rape and gang rape videos, or any other objectionable material through social media, for example, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, so on and so forth. That's another thing that you need to understand from this newspaper article. Now let us look at some of the editorials and columns from today's newspaper, beginning with a quote by former White House Chief of Staff when he said, "Never waste a good crisis." Rahm Emanuel. Now since the crisis has been created, generated, this article says that it is better that we utilize this crisis and bring about institutional reforms in RBI. We have seen that RBI and the central government, they were in disagreement with each other on a host of issues, numerous issues. One such issue was the classification of NPAs, non-performing assets, which led to PCA, prompt corrective action by the RBI, under which it became increasingly difficult for some banks to lend credit. Also, this had a devastating impact, according to the government, on power distribution companies, DISCOMs. There was also disagreement over the excessive reserves of RBI. The government wanted more of these reserves. There was a disagreement and tussle. There were rumors that government may invoke Section 7 of RBI Act for the first time in its history, where any direction issued by the central government under Section 7 to the RBI is binding on the RBI. And it is in this backdrop that RBI Governor Urjit Patel resigned from his office. Many people criticize RBI Governor for resigning. They say that instead of standing up to the central government, because central government, according to them, is violating the institutional integrity, the autonomy of RBI. So instead of standing up to the government and preventing the government from eroding the autonomy of RBI, what RBI governor has done, he has resigned from his office. So it's a weak decision taken by the former RBI governor. But be that as it may, now since he has resigned, we should utilize this crisis to have some institutional reforms in RBI. Similarly, on the patterns of Monetary Policy Committee. For example, till 2 years ago, it was the independent decision of the RBI to decide the monetary policy, interest rates, reverse repo, so on and so forth. But 2 years ago, a monetary policy was constituted, and now a committee instead of an individual will decide the monetary policy rules. So this newspaper article says that we should have more such institutional mechanisms to prevent a situation where an individual can take a decision. Something that was done recently by the government on the issue of these reserves. So the government and RBI held talks with each other and decided that we will set up an expert committee. And this expert committee will decide the question of these reserves, what percentage of these reserves can be given at the disposal of the central government. So we should have institutional mechanisms in which we can remove the personal element in the decision making of the RBI governor and replace this personal element with the institutional element such as these committees. That's one thing that this newspaper article talks about. Another thing, the role of the Reserve Bank of India governor is ill-defined, not clearly defined. What is going to be the role of this RBI governor? That is also something that Raghuram Rajan, the former RBI governor, talks about in his book as well. Dr. Raghuram Rajan says there is a danger in keeping the position of RBI governor ill-defined, because then if this position is ill-defined, the bureaucracy, the bureaucrats in the central government, in the central secretariat, will have a scope of creating more rules which will deprive RBI governor of his powers. So we should clearly define the RBI governor's roles. We should clearly define his institutional authority. We should clearly define what is his status in the hierarchy of the officers. And also we should have more and more institutional mechanisms to replace the personal element in the decision making at the RBI and replace it with institutional mechanism. That is what this newspaper article is all about. Now let us look at another column on page number 11 written by Japan's envoy to India. Today is Universal Health Coverage Day. And what is universal health coverage according to Japan? It's providing every single individual, not only those who are below poverty line or those who come from poor sections of the society, but providing everybody essential health quality services, that too without facing financial difficulties. That is what universal health coverage in Japan is all about. And Japan has implemented this universal health coverage more than half a century ago in 1961. And today Japan is the world leader apart from United Kingdom in providing universal health coverage to its citizens. Now tomorrow a question can be asked in your mains examination. How can Japan collaborate with India or coordinate with India? Now tomorrow a question can be asked in your mains examination about India-Japan relationship and in which sectors India and Japan have collaborated with each other. One such sector is the health sector. For example, Japan has helped in the eradication of polio in India. Today, Japan is getting Indian nurses trained in Japan. Also, if we look at in Kolkata, control center on diarrhea has been established by Japan. And today, Japanese and Indian doctors are exchanging ideas and expertise at the control of diarrhea in India. It is in these areas that Japan and India have worked very closely with each other in the health sector. Now, Japanese envoy has praised India's program called Ayushman Bharat, which is India's first step towards providing a universal health coverage to its citizens. So Japanese envoy says that if India has been helped by Japanese on these matters, Japan can also be helped by India in Ayurveda, for example. And Ayurveda can bring a new dimension to Japan's healthcare system. That is what this newspaper article is all about. Let's look at some of the prelims based questions. OSIRIS-REx recently in news is a NASA asteroid study mission. That is from today's newspaper on the last page of the Hindu. Sabang port recently in news is in Indonesia. And this is the explanation of it. Contour bunding is a method of soil conservation used in none of the above, because contour bunding is associated with terracing. Its purpose is to check the flow of water on a hill slope in order to reduce soil erosion. Mains based question, your answer should be in less than 150 words. Comment on the challenges in the implementation of the witness protection scheme. Let's look at how the answer should look like. A witness protection scheme, first the introduction, was cleared by the Supreme Court in late 2018. The witness protection scheme has been drafted by the Centre in consultation with the states. The need for such a scheme was felt by the Supreme Court while hearing a public interest litigation. The Supreme Court, among other things, wondered if there is a witness protection guaranteed by the National Investigation Agency Act, why can't a similar scheme extend to other areas? Hence this scheme. But the scheme has been criticized by many on the grounds that it may not be implementable. Below are the reasons cited. Number one, feasibility. There are over 28.4 million cases pending in subordinate courts in India, of which perhaps 70% are criminal cases. If on an average there are half a dozen witnesses in each case, this may require change of identity for millions of people. This may not be feasible logistically as well as financially. Because according to this witness protection scheme, a witness is to be provided with a different identity. You have to create a different identity for a witness. And if you have to create a different identity for a witness, and let's assume there are dozen witnesses in every case, it may not be financially and logistically possible. And what is this witness protection scheme? Day before yesterday, we have discussed this in our Hindu newspaper analysis. Second, unrealistic. The scheme mentions providing police escort to the courtroom, temporary safe houses and relocation of the witnesses. Let's say for example there is a person whose job commitments require her to be at a different location. This provision in the scheme might not work. Also, questions are being raised about the duration of the police protection. If these concerns are not addressed, then the scheme might turn out to be another case of unimplementable orders of the Supreme Court. For example, Supreme Court banned the firecrackers and provided for a window that within 2 hours you will have to burst green firecrackers only. And ultimately this order could not be implemented on the ground. Recently also Supreme Court said that all women in the age group of 10 to 50 are allowed entry into the Sabarimala temple. But even then this order was not implemented because there were protests in Kerala against this order. So unless and until these criticisms are addressed about the witness protection scheme, then we can say that this witness protection scheme will run into the list of all those unimplementable orders issued by the Supreme Court of late. That is it from our newspaper analysis for today. Have a great day.